Truffles. Truffles. A restaurant will shave $8 worth of fungus onto your pasta and charge you $60 for the privilege, and the strange part is the fungus itself has almost no flavor until it's been dead for a week. A fresh truffle out of the ground smells like almost nothing. It's the decomposition process that produces the aroma compounds chefs chase, meaning the product being sold at $4,000 a pound is, biologically speaking, a rotting mushroom at its most pungent moment. Pigs were the original hunting method, because sows can detect a compound in truffles nearly identical to a pheromone found in boar saliva, which is a fact most menus leave off the description. Dogs replaced pigs mostly because the pigs kept eating the profits before anyone could stop them. The scarcity is real. White truffles from Alba only grow in symbiotic root systems with specific oak and hazelnut trees, and they can't be commercially farmed the way black truffles increasingly are in orchards across Australia and the American South. But the price tag owes as much to the theatre around it as the biology. A dish gets finished tableside, a razor-thin shaving falls onto the plate in front of you, and the ritual itself becomes part of what's being purchased. Remove the shaving ceremony and serve the same aroma compound synthesized in a lab, which restaurants routinely do with truffle oil, and the entire luxury collapses into a $2 bottle at the grocery store. Wagyu beef. Wagyu beef. The $300 steak on the menu comes from a cattle breed that was selectively bred for centuries not because the meat tasted better, but because the animals were originally used as draft labor in Japanese rice fields, and farmers wanted cows that stored fat efficiently to survive long working seasons on limited feed. The marbling that now sells for triple digits per ounce started as a survival trait, not a culinary one. Japan didn't widely eat beef at all until the Meiji era in the late 1800s, when the country lifted a Buddhist-influenced ban on eating four-legged animals that had held for over 1,000 years. Once beef entered the diet, breeders leaned hard into the genetic tendency toward intramuscular fat, and by the 20th century, Wagyu had become a defined, regulated category with grading systems tracking marbling density down to a numeric score. American beef labeled Wagyu on menus is frequently a cross between Japanese cattle and Angus, raised domestically, and legally allowed to use the name despite tasting closer to a well-marbled ribeye than the genuine Kobe article. True A5-grade Wagyu from Japan is restricted for export, tightly regulated, and shockingly fatty in a way some American diners find closer to eating butter than steak. The price reflects genuine rarity for the authentic product. It also reflects a menu word doing a lot of unverified work for the domestic imitation sitting 3 tables over. Champagne. Champagne. The bubbles that make a bottle of champagne cost 10 times more than an identical sparkling wine from 300 miles away started as a winemaking mistake that the region spent 2 centuries turning into a legal monopoly. Cold cellars in northern France used to cause an unwanted second fermentation in the spring, trapping carbon dioxide in bottles that regularly exploded in storage, killing cellar workers and destroying entire vintages. Winemakers in the Champagne region considered it a defect for over 100 years before a series of pressure-resistant glass innovations in the 1700s made the bubbles survivable and then, eventually, desirable. What actually separates Champagne from any other sparkling wine is not superior grapes. It's a legally protected regional name backed by French law and international trade agreements, meaning a producer in California can make an objectively similar wine using the identical traditional method and is legally barred from calling it champagne anywhere the designation is enforced. Blind tasting panels, run by wine critics with decades of trained palates, have repeatedly failed to reliably distinguish champagne from high-quality sparkling wine made in Franciacorta, Cava, or California using the same production method. What buyers are paying for is a protected geographic label and the centuries of royal association that came with it, dating back to Champagne being the coronation region for French kings. The chalk soil helps. The name does the rest. Saffron. Saffron. A single pound of the world's most expensive spice by weight requires hand-harvesting roughly 75,000 crocus flowers, each one plucked at dawn before the sun wilts the delicate stigma threads that are the only usable part of the plant. Every flower produces exactly 3 threads. There's no mechanized shortcut that works, because the threads are too fragile for machine harvesting and have to be pulled by hand within a narrow window after the flower opens. That labor math is why a spice this small in volume rivals gold by weight. The origin traces back over 3,000 years to Persia, where saffron was used simultaneously as a dye, a medicine, and a food coloring, and its cultivation required exactly the kind of intensive seasonal labor that made it valuable in ancient trade routes long before modern branding got involved. Adulteration became such a common fraud risk historically that medieval Nuremberg had a law called the Saffron Code, which punished saffron counterfeiters by burning, a punishment reserved for almost nothing else. Today, the fraud has simply modernized. A meaningful percentage of saffron sold online is cut with dyed corn silk, safflower petals, or beet fiber, because the real product is expensive enough that faking it is profitable even at a small scale. The genuine spice does have a real, if modest, flavor payoff in a dish. But the price is set almost entirely by the 75,000 flowers, not by anything a home cook's tongue can reliably detect in a pinch of rice. Uni. The bright orange substance served on a tiny plate at a sushi counter for $12 a piece is not mussel, meat, or roe in the way most people assume. It's the gonad of a sea urchin, and the fact that most diners have no idea they're eating reproductive tissue is largely because the menu translation smoothed over what the Japanese word actually describes. Sea urchins were considered a nuisance species for most of American coastal history, treated as a threat to kelp forests that fishermen actively worked to eradicate rather than harvest. California divers in the mid-20th century were paid bounties in some regions to remove them from the ocean floor because unchecked urchin populations decimate the kelp ecosystems that support commercially valuable fish. The turn toward luxury status came almost entirely through the Japanese export market, where uni had centuries of established culinary tradition, and demand from Japanese buyers in the 1970s created a sudden commercial incentive for American divers to harvest rather than exterminate. Quality is judged almost entirely on texture and a narrow flavor window between briny and sweet, and it degrades fast, meaning fresh uni has to move from ocean floor to plate within days. That perishability, combined with a labor-intensive harvest requiring individual divers to hand-collect each urchin, keeps supply tight and prices high for a product that was, within living memory, something coastal towns paid to get rid of. Matcha. The vivid green powder now selling for $40 a tin at specialty grocery stores is made from the exact same tea plant as the bag of green tea sitting in the clearance aisle, with the entire price difference coming down to how the leaves were grown and processed in the final weeks before harvest. Roughly 3 weeks before picking, matcha-destined tea plants get covered with shade cloth, blocking sunlight and forcing the plant to produce more chlorophyll and amino acids in a defensive response. That shading step is labor-intensive, requires precise timing, and is the primary reason matcha carries more caffeine and a distinct umami sweetness compared to sun-grown green tea. After harvest, the leaves are steamed, dried, stripped of stems and veins, and stone ground into a fine powder using granite mills that can only process a small quantity per hour without overheating the leaf and destroying the flavor compounds, which is the actual production bottleneck driving cost. Ceremonial-grade matcha, reserved historically for Japanese tea ceremonies dating back to Zen Buddhist monks in the 12th century, uses only the youngest top leaves. Culinary grade, the kind blended into lattes and baked goods at coffee chains, uses older leaves lower on the plant and costs a fraction as much. Much of what's marketed in the West as premium ceremonial matcha is actually culinary grade repackaged with ceremonial branding, because almost no American consumer has tasted the real thing closely enough to tell the difference. Manuka honey. A jar of honey that costs $40 while regular honey sells for $6 is being marketed almost entirely around one antibacterial compound, methylglyoxal, that exists in genuinely elevated concentrations in nectar collected from the Manuka bush native to New Zealand and parts of Australia. That part of the claim holds up under lab testing. What doesn't hold up as cleanly is the supply chain behind the label. Manuka honey fraud became such a widespread problem that New Zealand's government implemented a mandatory testing and certification system in 2018, after investigations found the volume of Manuka honey being sold globally each year vastly exceeded what New Zealand's actual Manuka bush population could realistically produce. Some estimates placed international sales at roughly 4 times the honey the country's bee industry was capable of generating, meaning a significant share of jars labeled Manuka on store shelves worldwide were diluted with cheaper honey or mislabeled outright before the certification crackdown. The honey does have a real, published research basis for wound care applications in clinical settings, which is where its reputation originated before consumer marketing picked it up for general use. But the jump from a hospital-grade wound treatment to a breakfast-table condiment came with a pricing structure that assumes every jar carries the therapeutic potency of the clinical version, when most consumer jars fall well short of medical-grade certification. Caviar substitutes. The pattern across almost every luxury food on this list is identical. Something starts as either a byproduct, a waste product, or a defect. A shortage or a labor-intensive process makes it scarce. And scarcity, dressed up with the right ritual, gets sold back to us as sophistication. The flower gets picked by hand. The mushroom gets shaved tableside. The urchin gets flown in overnight. None of that theater is fake, exactly. It's just doing more of the actual selling than the flavor is. If you like this, check out our video on foods that used to be peasant food and are now luxury menu items.